Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof for the 25th of September, not November, 2025. This is concerning military aid to Ukraine and military developments within Ukraine and Russia as well. We're going to start with a general kind of view of war. This is coming from Zelensky as he was speaking at the UN. War has already reached too many people to pretend it has nothing to do with you. Tens of thousands of people now know how to professionally kill using drones. Stopping that kind of attack is harder than stopping any gun, knife or bomb. Even simple drones can fly thousands of kilometers. Even countries with limited resources can now build weapons dangerous to their neighbors. Soon drones will be fighting drones, targeting critical infrastructure, targeting people, fully autonomous, no human involved. This is incredibly worrying, but completely accurate. This is an appraisal of reality that makes the future look almost dystopian, or could do. Drones are dangerous, and I was saying the other day that they are cheap. They can cause an awful lot of damage, as well as being able to do reconnaissance and all sorts of other things. And they can disrupt, they can close airports, they can, do all sorts, as we know. But they can be operated by both state actors and non-state actors and individuals. It could be that Denmark's airports being closed and the prevalence of these drones in Denmark over the last couple of days could be coming from random hobbyists and individuals. And they can do that cheaply on their own. Or we can have non-state actors like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whatever, doing things with drones. We can have criminal gangs doing things. Well, we already do. We know the cartels use drones in Mexico. We know that criminal gangs in Israel, for example, have used drones. I wrote an article on this for Only Sky. And yeah, the use of drones is going to be a challenge for a whole host of areas of society and the world going forward. And Zelensky's tapping into this, and Ukraine is at the forefront of development of drones, but and you will see fully autonomous swarms of drones fairly soon, I'm sure. There are rumors that Ukraine is already experimenting with them, and we're going to touch a little bit on some of that later. So yeah, worrying times ahead. What do we do about that? Now, Zelensky also said, I had a very detailed conversation. This is in New York with the UN. At the UN. I had a very detailed conversation with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, ahead of the many meetings in New York. Ukraine has conveyed to its partners the urgent list of needs for air defense systems and missiles, the availability of which could influence events and limit Russia's ability to wage war. Mark and I discussed the implementation of the PURL initiative. More on that in a second. That's the American selling weapons to allies that buy them for Ukraine, particularly regarding air defense, he continues, which is needed most urgently, has already begun the necessary communication with our partners. Thank you. Now, Reuters has reported that Ukraine is preparing for the fact that in the war against Russia, it, quote, will have to rely more on its own forces than on the support of its allies. This isn't quite true, but they are going to have to rely an awful lot on themselves, and that, however, does mean working with our allies, and it means getting funding from partners in order to build their own military resilience. But they're also relying an awful lot on allies in NATO and the EU. What they're not really relying on is the US doing anything other than selling a lot of weaponry through the PURL initiative to allies, and also helping with intelligence and whatnot. But I think Trump's rhetoric change the other day was a signal that the US is going to walk away from the Ukraine war in any kind of mediation, negotiation position. And really, he pretty explicitly said it. European Union, with the help of the European Union, Ukraine can win. In other words, not with the help of the US, we're not going to help you win, but the European Union will. So it looks like the European Union and other NATO allies, like, for example, the UK, obviously, Norway, and Canada, those particularly, then you've also got Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Those entities, they are going to be the backbone for Ukraine's defense, and the US is just going to sell stuff. Kiev's hopes for a new tough US sanctions against Moscow are gradually fading, and that's a real shame. That, you know, Trump has had every opportunity to put sanctions on, hasn't taken it, and with such restrained expectations, Zelensky is going to the UN, but it has gone to UN and spoke at the UN. According to a senior European diplomat, intelligence sharing with the US and a new mechanism for purchasing American weapons when Europe buys them and transfers them to Ukraine are key conditions for Ukrainian troops to be able to hold out. So that intelligence sharing is super important. That's something the US can do without spending huge amounts of money, right? That's not going to come up on a balance sheet particularly. Okay, that's the intelligence they're already doing. They've got the satellites up there. That is, they're not giving tangible things like they would be with presidential drawdown authority, you know, weaponry and whatnot. Now, Zelensky says that NATO-backed PURL weapons program, so the buying of stuff from the US, is showing a success, with the first shipments already delivered to Ukraine. The cost-sharing program covering Patriot missiles and HIMARS systems, I believe missiles, will expand further in October, it is quoted. Now, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said, I think today on Fox News, that US weapons will continue flowing into Ukraine, funded by allies. He recalled a July call with President Trump, quote, "Mark, we're opening the floodgates again. Lethal and non-lethal aid will go to Ukraine, but allies will foot the bill." And that's the thing. You know, the US is not interested in helping. The US is interested in, but Trump is interested in making money out of this. I talked before about how he only supports winners, and he doesn't really care for supporting those who are in the right or anything that aligns with geopolitical strategizing. He doesn't seem to have too much time for that, or perhaps even understanding of that. He just looks at Russia and thinks it's a massive country, therefore they can't lose. They've got a bigger army. They've got 11 time zones. They've got, you know, all these resources. They're the gas station of the world, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, you know, Ukraine cannot prevail. Then he gets given information that shows actually Russia are in economic and military hot water at the moment, and Ukraine are holding out. So the then goes, okay, Ukraine can win this. Let's back Ukraine, but we're just going to sell stuff to Ukraine. We'll make money out of this. And he's kind of talked very openly in those ways. He keeps saying, we're not putting a penny into Ukraine to appease his MAGA base, but really to appease him and the aides around him and his policymakers around him. When you have America First is about looking at prioritizing where your money goes. This is why USAID funding, you know, humanitarian support for the world, UN funding, all of this stuff is like, doesn't fit in with America First. It doesn't see the US, such an ideology, as this global influencer and a projection of power. They just expect, I guess, power is a divine right for the United States. Now, globalists and internationalists would say, well, you get that power by investing in the world. And that brings you soft power and hard power. And you need to project the United States. But in order to project, that costs money. But you get return on the investment through trade deals and this and that and influence and blah, blah, blah. Trump doesn't see it like that. Isolationists don't see it like that. America First people don't see it like that. It's like, right, America First, so our money needs to be spent here. And we're not spending it anywhere else. And our priorities need to fit into that kind of framework. So if we are helping Ukraine, it's only by selling to other people, and they can be the ones that are footing the bill. So really, you know, Europe and allies are supporting Ukraine. The US isn't supporting Ukraine. In any other way, like, I don't say that, for example, if I did my shopping at Sainsbury's or Tesco's or Asda or whatever, I wouldn't go, oh, look, my existence is being supported by Sainsbury's. Thank you, Sainsbury's. Thank you, Tesco. You know, it's amazing that, you know, what a wonderful thing Tesco does for my existence. If it wasn't for, you know, if it wasn't for Tesco, I'd be buying it from Sainsbury's. If it wasn't for Sainsbury's, I'd be buying it from Co-op. If it wasn't, do you know what? It's a shop and they're selling me stuff and they're making a profit on selling stuff to me. They're not selling stuff to me to support me morally. You can give a damn about my moral existence. There's no kind of morality involved in their decision to sell stuff to me. They don't really know who I am. They don't care who I am, any of those shops, right? And that's how we should understand America's position here with supporting Ukraine through military aid. There is no moral dimension really to them selling stuff to Ukraine, other than they're selling stuff to Ukraine and they're not selling it to Russia. There is a decision not to sell stuff to Russia, I guess. Right. Now, the EU is considering a reparations loan and playing around with the frozen Russian assets of up to 130 billion euros for Ukraine, backed by interest from frozen Russian assets. So this kind of looks rather similar to the loan system they've already got, which is using the profits from frozen Russian assets, if you like, to underwrite loans to Ukraine. They've already given over 10 billion this year to Ukraine, 10 billion euros. Now, I don't really understand the difference here, but backed by interest from frozen Russian assets, Kiev would repay only once it receives reparations from Moscow. Final size to be decided after the IMF assesses Ukraine's financing needs. The IMF has actually come out and said your financing needs are much worse than you said they were. And I think it's moved to like a $35 billion gap next year to, I think, 2026 to a $60 billion gap. And I think Ukraine have agreed to that. So after they've decided the financing needs from 2026 to 2027, I can't work out why that's any different from what they do already. But other than the size, it's gone from being $50 billion of loans underwritten by frozen Russian assets to 130 billion. So Germany is open to a new EU plan to use the frozen Russian assets and is urging other countries to support the initiative. According to the advisor to Friedrich Merz on European affairs, quote, this will be one of the key topics at the informal meeting of the European Council to be held next week in Copenhagen. So Germany backs EU's creative plan to send frozen Russian cash to Ukraine. I'm sure more details on that will emerge. Now, the EU is allocating about 200 million euros to provide school lunches in Ukraine. So that's something the EU is also doing. The EU is doing an awful lot, right? Allies are doing an awful lot. I wonder, we haven't really heard the rhetoric from Trump in the last couple of weeks saying we've paid 350 billion. Europe needs to step up. We've paid way more than Europe. Blah blah blah. All that stuff that's absolutely, objectively, empirically wrong, right? We haven't actually heard that recently, and I'm wondering whether he has been corrected on that. And there is this understanding that, do you know what the EU is doing an awful lot? There's a lot of money going to Ukraine from a lot of different sources and individual countries unilaterally, bilaterally. This was and I presume this is accurate. This is from the Wind of Change Research Group. This is a very powerful chart. So financial and military support for Ukraine to fight Russia alone since 2022. I presume this is not including pledged stuff. This is only already given stuff, because I think the number's actually hard than that. But anyway, just look at the kind of idea here. So 167 billion euros. Funding for Russia through fossil fuel purchases since 2022, 214 billion. So they've actually given, the EU's given since the beginning of the war, not so much at the moment, but still some going there. But they've given an awful lot of money to Russia through buying of fossil fuels. Now, of course, that comes at a cost to Russia in extracting and delivering that to Europe. And what has been paid to Russia since, more recently, has meant that, it falls way below what they're budgeted for. Anyway, let's not get into discussion of that. That's still money going from Europe to Russia. But then look at this bar below. So, 167, I mean, really, that's what we want to look at. 167 billion. Let's say, I don't know, Europe's given 200 billion to Ukraine in terms of military aid and financial and humanitarian aid. The emergency spending on COVID-19 pandemic in the EU was 3,200 billion. So and this is an existential threat to the EU, as COVID was a health existential threat. But it's interesting that it's not a drop in the ocean, but it's a mere fraction, a very small fraction of what was spent on COVID. Anyway, just thought that's interesting to throw in there. Now, the UK is weighing a plan to fund loans for Ukraine using 25 billion pounds in frozen Russian assets. The loans would confiscate the assets outright, but would unlock the full value through international law-compliant mechanisms. The EU and UK aim to use these funds as leverage until Russia pays reparations. So it looks like that could be the same plan for the UK as we heard from the EU. But again, I don't know what differentiates that from what they're already doing, other than releasing even more. Now, the American company Shield, so let's get on to actual equipment. Shield AI, in cooperation with Ukrainian Iron Belly, has created the long-range strike drone, the D4, according to Militiani. The drone is capable of delivering strikes at a distance of up to 100 kilometers with a 3-kilogram warhead. So that's pretty comparable to the Lancet. Lancet's at 3.5 kilograms, I think, as a warhead. This drone relies on optical navigation and after launch can reach the target completely autonomously and hit it. And there's your difference. You just send it up and see you later, mate. The drone is currently undergoing field tests. Production volumes range from 500 to 1,000 units per month. And the companies are scaling up to produce 1,000 units per month on a stable basis. So, AI, autonomous, targeting, striking, is it targeting or just the striking? Can reach the so it's not autonomous targeting, which means you can't just send it up in the air and say, go find me a target. You find a target, then send it up in the air and it goes and locates the target, and I presume can react if the target moves, and then hits it. And then it's fire and forget, essentially, but from 100 kilometers. And if they can produce 1,000 of those a month, thank you very much. Wow. It's all about scale. For these distance munitions, Ukraine prevails on a battlefield if Russia's economy collapses and they can hit the Russians at distance without having to attrit their own troops. Just swarm the air with missiles and drones and AI drones and whatnot. Now, the US Air Force has awarded Lockheed Martin a $26 million contract to provide a foreign military sales support for Ukraine's F-16 program, according to the Pentagon Defense blog. The contract will fund the creation of country-specific technical orders tailored to Ukraine's fleet of fighting Falcons. So I guess this is Ukraine going to the American government saying, we want support for our F-16s. We will pay for it. And they say, it's going to cost you $26 million and it's going to go to this company, Lockheed Martin. So that's happening. Now, Finland's ammunition production has surged amid the war in Ukraine at the Defense Forces Explosives Center in Haapajärvi. Output has increased by 300%, while NATO-Lapua has also boosted production, although exact figures remain undisclosed. It is rare for a country the size of Finland to maintain two facilities capable of producing heavy artillery and shells and grenades. Yet Finland has preserved and expanded this capacity, while many other European nations scaled down or closed their munition plants. Part of the production is intended for international support, reflecting Finland's contribution to NATO cooperation and allied operations. Both NATO-Lapua and the Explosives Center are known for producing high-quality, precise munitions, including 155mm artillery shells, and the recent expansion demonstrates Finland's ability to respond rapidly to rising demand while ensuring reliability and quality. So they've got really good quality, reliable shells that have been massively expanded in production. Okay, this is 3.5, almost 4 years into the war, but these things take time. You can't just ramp up production of shell factories like that, especially if you're wondering that if the war ends in, say, a year's time, then what happens to all that capital that you put in? Do you get a return on that huge investment, etc., etc.? Now, the German giant Rheinmetall hints that its latest swarming combat material has been tested in Ukraine. So we're back to drones. The information is published by Defence Express. At the International Exhibition DSEI in London, the Rheinmetall concern presented its latest kamikaze drone, the FV-014. The device weighs 14 kilograms, has an operational range of 100 kilometers, and can stay in the air for 60 minutes. The warhead weighs 5 kilograms, a slightly larger warhead than the previous one we are hearing about, which is combined fragmentation, cumulative in effect, and can penetrate 600 millimeters of armor. 600 millimeters. That's 60 millimeters would be 6 centimeters. 600 meters is 60 centimeters. It's like that amount of armor. That's got to be 60 millimeters. which is 6 centimeters. I mean, that's 6 centimeters of armor, over 2 inches of armor. So 2.54 inches per centimeter, 2.54 centimeters per inch, sorry. So that is, just over 2 inches. Yeah, that's got to be wrong. The FV014 can be used in the absence of satellite communication signals, as well as used according to the so-called drone swarm principle. The device is launched from a transport launch container. Rheinmetall presented the drone at an exhibition with the slogan, Rheinmetall drones battle tested. According to experts, the only place where the FV014 could have been tested is in battle in Ukraine. So they have evidently tested this in Ukraine. It can be used in the absence of satellite communication signals. So that's pretty good. Yeah. Someone else going 600 millimeters? No, I think not. So I think they've got that wrong. Okay. Now Italy is sending Ukraine an APC on steroids, quote on steroids, to evacuate wounded soldiers under drone fire. Now these look like M113s that they've already given a bunch from Italy, I think. Now Italy is sending the VCC-1 Camellino variants of the M113 with additional 6mm steel armor plating. So yeah, that gives you an idea. So 6mm being less than a centimeter. So that's going to be something like that. The vehicles will serve, that's extra steel armor plating. The vehicles will serve as battlefield ambulances rather than standard troop carriers. Enhanced protection targets 7.62mm and 12.7mm rounds that penetrate standard M113 aluminium. So the problem with the M113 is, I mean, it's really versatile, still being used widely in Ukraine, obviously, but the armor is pants, and it's pants because it's aluminium armor, which makes it a lot lighter, but yeah, it needs more. So adding this 6mm of steel is going to help it out. Ukraine has received around 1,500 M113s from allies, but lost over 400 in combat operations so far. This addresses growing threats to medical evacuation teams from drones and artillery fragments. So that's good that they're getting those. I don't know how many of these they are getting. Back in spring, Rome pledged 400 M113s and variants. Ukraine had already received around 1,500 of the M113s and had lost no fewer than 400. So I guess these are the ones that were pledged previously. Yeah, but I don't know that they've received any, or have they received any of these? But that's good news that if they haven't gone already, then they are due to be going, or they're consistently going out at the moment. I don't know. But these are the sorts of vehicles that get attrited really frequently, and you just need constant sort of APC provision from allies and from Ukraine. But Ukraine, while they make MRATs, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, and mobility vehicles, things equivalent to like the Humvees, the Novotals and the Cossacks and all that, they don't produce APCs, and they don't produce infantry fighting vehicles. So getting M113s from Italy here, that's going to be useful. Getting the Patria, although not so many of them, but they're a lot better, a lot more modern, from, was it Lithuania recently, or was it Estonia? Latvia? No, I think it was actually Latvia. And then, of course, the VABs that have gone obsolete in France, they're getting those as they are being replaced. So that's really useful. Anyway, Turkish defense giant Baykar, that makes a Bayraktar drone, owned by the son-in-law of Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. Baykar expands its Ukrainian operations as innovations, quote, explode. Interesting. So Ukraine has become a hub of innovation during Russia's war. Baykar CEO Haluk Bayraktar says the country has experiencing a true boom in technological innovation, and world leaders recognize its potential. Since 2022, Baykar has supplied Ukraine with Bayraktar TB2 drones, strike drones, which have been actively used to destroy Russian positions. Videos and drones and photos showing the destruction of Russian equipment and manpower by these drones have gone viral on social media, but of course we haven't seen them used too much recently, although they do seem to be making a bit of a recovery, a renaissance in 2020, renaissance for reconnaissance. In 2024, Baykar began building a drone manufacturing plant in Ukraine. So let's see. The war has become a catalyst for rapid technological innovation. While there are only a few companies producing drones before, today there are already hundreds. The same applies to robotics and other high technologies, he emphasized. According to him, the key task is now to transform startups into large industrial enterprises. So, in Ukraine, efforts are underway to harness this experience and give startups the opportunity to grow into larger companies at an industrial scale. Bayraktar noted that Baikar's Ukrainian office already employs more than 120 people, and the company continues to assist Ukraine both technologically and in other areas. Interesting. So, Ukrainian youth will have the opportunity to gain knowledge and education through the latest scientific and technological methodology already applied in Turkey. Bayraktar announced. Beyond military innovations, Baykar, together with the National Center Minor Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, will create a modern educational center for children and young people. He added that the academy already hosts a mathematics museum, and the new center will expand practical opportunities for students in other sciences. It's the sort of thing you do if you're properly getting involved in Ukraine. So one, you need to be sure that Ukraine is going to survive going forward. If you're going to start building building factories, and B, employing a bunch of people, and C, starting up like museums of mathematics and working with education in Ukraine, you have to be seeing the long-term existence of Ukraine, and you have to be bought into that. So it's clear that they see Ukraine as being viable going forward. Now, Canada is providing a $2.5 million US dollar boost to Ukraine's cybersecurity under the Tallinn mechanism, a 12-nation initiative supporting digital defense. The funds will help protect critical infrastructure, counter cyber threats, procure equipment, and develop early warning and prevention systems. So that's super important. Germany's so this is slightly off topic to a degree, but it's to do with the US not being a very reliable ally anymore due to what they've done with regard to both Ukraine and attacking the European Union, and going to Germany and celebrating the AfD as JD Vance and Elon Musk have done, and then saying that Europe's biggest enemy is freedom of speech. Ha ha ha, irony there, hypocrisy there. Just essentially starting trade wars and whatever. So the US is seen as an unreliable ally these days. So Germany's 83 billion euro defense plan sends less than 10% to US weapons, with nearly all major contracts, that's frigates, Eurofighters, air defences, armoured vehicles, going to EU suppliers. So we know that the new EU military strategy from a couple of years ago has stated that, was it 60%? Is it 65%? Something like that. Let's say 60% of all European EU military procurement has to come from within the EU, because of course if you're going to spend money, let's keep it in the EU, because then that money makes jobs, and jobs bring tax, and then that money swishes around the EU and multiplies. So you get that money multiplier effect. If you're going to put 83 billion, you're going to spend 83 billion euros on defense and spend that all in the US, then the US does very well, thank you very much, and Europe doesn't. So this is an example of where Trump's foreign policy agenda, or the people around him, or whatever, the US's approach to allies around the world has lost them serious amounts of money in terms of big deals. And we've seen Denmark move away to get the SANT rather than the Patriots. Although there are, so the 10% here is probably going to be, although it mentions Eurofighters being bought here, and Germany has ordered more, I think they still got F-35s. So there are certain things that the Americans provide that say Europeans. So Europeans don't have an equivalent at the moment really to the F-35. So you will get dependence on the US for some key elements, just not for everything. So only limited buys like Patriot missiles. You said that of course that they run a lot of Patriots, the Germans, or some Patriots, and so they're going to be buying missiles. And P-8A torpedoes come from the USA, so maybe not F-35s, but I think when it comes to Denmark, are they getting F-30? So I think there is still this demand for certain key American elements from within the EU. Right, Politico has reported that the Bundeswehr has prepared a procurement of up to 83 billion. So just a bit more detail on this, covering 154 different budget requests from September 2025 to December 2026, about 8% of it. So it's less than 10%. It's 8% of this is planned to be spent on the procurement of US weapons, Patriot launchers and missiles. So not just the missiles, making up the vast majority of that 8%. But that's a pretty incredible expenditure there. Now, this is Benjamin Tallis listening to Defense Minister Paul Jonsson in Berlin. So Russia is learning, he's a Swedish Defense Minister, Paul Jonsson. Russia is learning, adapting and becoming more lethal in Ukraine. We must move from a peacetime mindset to wartime readiness. We must reward the bold and the innovative. We need mass production of new technologies. So I think you're going to start seeing an awful lot of drone production and innovative drone manufacturing and research done in Europe, and you're going to see Rheinmetall and these other big players in Europe, BAE Systems and French Dassault and whatever. I think try and ramp up. And I've talked previously about SAMP-T and why they haven't figured as much as, say, Patriots, but I think they've missed an opportunity there. But anyway, going forward, there's going to be a lot of need for Europe to really step up in terms of defence research and expenditure, because the threats are there. That much is obvious, and reliance on the US is not seen as exactly what is wanted. Now, I did a whole separate video on the FP5. The FP5 is a Flamingo cruise missile that the Ukrainians are making. Please go and check that out. It was due to be slotted in this video, but it's too much stuff. So they are essentially using these turbofan jet engines that they've got from landfill, really. Got a whole bunch of these that they are going to use to manufacture these Flamingos, and they don't need much out the engines. They just need to tinker with them to make sure they can last basically 3.5 hours. These engines apparently got 10 hours of lifetime left in them, and that doesn't really matter. If you whack them on a plane, your plane would fly for 10 hours and then the engine would go, probably need complete overhaul here. But they just need these missiles to fly for 3.5 hours and then explode. So they're refurbing these turbofan jet engines with cheap parts that will get them 3.5 hours of flight, and that's a month's worth. And then they're going to be producing their own engines, I think, either localized in Ukraine, so Firepoint localized the production of jet engines for cruise missiles. They are also, I think, making things outside of Ukraine. Now, there are lots of stuff coming out, details on the Flamingo, such as they can penetrate 10 meters underground, that they fly like 50 meters above the surface for evading radar and whatnot. They are making 2 a day, and they're hoping to scale up to sort of 7 a day, and that's supposedly by the end of the year. It takes 6 hours to build the fuselage in an automated process, and so it's all pretty impressive, looking pretty good, and they're happy with the accuracy. So it's got a 14-meter circle error probable, which means 50% of the missiles land within 14 meters of the exact target. And they said, we're happy with that. If you want to improve that, then you have to start spending lots and lots of money. And the idea is that this is a fairly inexpensive missile for what it does, considering it's packing 1,150 kilograms of explosives, which means that even if you do land 14 meters away, you're still going to do an awful lot of damage. Now, 50% of those missiles can completely miss, but you get the point. It's a trade-off. If you want to spend huge amounts of money on something that looks really good, then go and buy a freaking Taurus off the Germans, or a Tomahawk off the Americans. If you want one of these bad boys at a snip of the price, packing a massive punch, then hey, we're here for you, and we're localizing as much as we can. 90% of the missile, I think, is assembled in Ukraine. They are diversifying their manufacturing places so that they don't risk having one place getting blown up. They're also making, I think, some of the fuel for this in Denmark. So some of the production is existing outside of the country, and also the warhead is made by a different company. It's a Ukrainian company, but just a different one. They don't make their own warheads. Anyway, that's that. Western firms are to invest $100 million in Ukraine's defense tech, according to the ministry, defense ministry, I presume. US investors led by Broadband Capital Investments plan to invest $15 million in Ukraine-based Swarmer, which specializes in drone swarm technology. So there is investment coming in now from outside of Ukraine, and the defense tech is getting some hedge fund, I presume, some venture capital investment from outside of the country. Okay, Ragnar Sass says, just back from Ukraine, from the most intensive startup conference I have visited, Defense Tech Valley. A number of battle-proven, so a bit of a summary here, a number of battle-proven Ukrainian defense startups is still growing. More importantly, they keep developing new features and products so fast that sometimes it's difficult to recognize a company 6 months later. Old EU defence companies have still a huge challenge adapting to the speed of changes on the front line. Their products are outdated and 10 times more pricey and not in high demand in Ukraine. A growing number of the sharpest European founders are entering defence tech, and they understand that they have to spend most of their time in Ukraine. Defence Valley was heavily dominated by drones, countless FPVs, 60 plus UGVs, so ground drones, and everything around the drone ecosystem. But there are still big challenges in some areas. There's still no clear winner who could replace DJI for ISR. So that's the DJI Mavic drones, the Chinese drones that get used for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Basically, they're still the go-to. Yes, there are some promising products, but nothing at scale on the front line yet. The interceptor drone segment seems to have the biggest growth in 2025. At least 50 companies are building something, but 5 to 7 are ahead of others with real combat success. There was a very impressive lineup of bombers, but on the front line, Baba Yaga is still dominated by Vampires with a 50% market share. So these Vampire drones, which I think are hexacopters. And finally, the most needed thing is still cheap mid-strike 60 to 200 kilometer drones. So we've just talked about two of them, an American company and investment in and the Ukrainian one, but there's German one, sorry. But we've talked about FP1 previously. FP1 and FP2, you've got they're a bit longer range, but you've got I think the I get confused. I think FP2 is your longer one, and the FP1 is the one that's being used quite a lot. And then you've got the Ram 2X as well. So I think that they really have ramped up their usage and production and procurement of those medium range drones. There's up to 200 kilometers. We have seen so much destruction over the last couple of months from those sorts of drones. So he says the most needed thing is still cheap mid-strike 60 to 200 kilometer drones. It depends what you're hitting there as well. So you can have, these 105 kilogram warhead drones to hit up to 200 kilometers, or you can have the equivalent to the Lancet, which is sort of 3.5-4 kilograms. I had non-stop meetings with the Ukrainian military, who are extremely eager to use any new tech without any red tape or delay. Defense Valley is the only defense event in the world where you can talk with soldiers who came directly from the front line. Some elite drone units like Khartia, Azov, K2, 3rd Brigade, Achilles, Rarog even had their own stand, and those folks are the fastest at implementing new stuff into combat. My favorite product was definitely a 12-meter underwater drone from Toloka. So that was that big one that you saw in the football ground, a huge thing that was actually made out of polystyrene and plywood, I think, but there is the real thing that it is representing. So that's got a range of up to 2,000 kilometers and a payload of up to 5 tons, 5,000 kilograms of warhead. And it was great to meet the Pink Flamingos indeed, and her family is much bigger than known. Oh, that's cryptic. So there's a whole family of cruise missile drones that they are manufacturing, it seems. Most of the companies showed products that are still very rough, not finished yet, but already have real combat tests. Most Ukrainian founders don't know the EU market, are bad at marketing and sales, but they are fast builders, and that's exactly what made the Valley so enjoyable. And it's not a polished fake suit carnival like almost every other defence event. The biggest value was indeed the 5,000 plus visitors and that equaled the community with real and messy startup vibe. I can't remember any other event that would have grown so fast, 3 times bigger in a year. It was so intensive that I did not even have time to visit or even talk or even look at the program at all, or even one talk or even look at the program at all about personal meetings and one-on-one. So in other words, he didn't go to any of the talks put on there, just like literally meeting people. Total of 50 plus. And finally, this event was super strong example of what Ukraine has it does have very strong cards. Tens of kick-ass teams and products that will help Ukraine win this war. But we, Europe, need to step up with 50 times more financing orders now. So there's that to locker. That was a mock-up of what it's supposed to be. There's a small version of the Flamingo that looks interesting. There's an example of some kind of buggy thing, and there's a Trembita. Now, Trembita's something that kind of we heard about early doors. And then we didn't hear about it for some time. Then we heard about it again, so that is being used. So Trembita is this, it was developed by hobbyists, really, that were trying to look at, say, Shahid drone and do something sort of similar to that, based on, I think, the doodlebug type technology from the Second World War. But that's how they could get a really cheap but effective product. And there it is. But maybe it's being used and we just don't know. And I'm sure there are so many weapons being used that we're just not aware of. You see these big explosions, you hear about a base being hit, or a refinery here and a barracks there. But you're not always sure what is hitting them, or even most of the time you're not sure. So this is a Toloka. The largest Toloka is just one of a family of underwater drones, the TLK 200, 400 or 1000. The drone is equipped with systems for planning and conducting autonomous missions. The drone has 4 integrated neural networks: optical, thermal, acoustic and inertial. Guidance systems: a thermal imager, optical camera, guidance by a source of radio frequency radiation, and for stable communication the drone is equipped with satellite comms with FHSS, whatever all of that means. But my goodness, wouldn't it be exciting to see these starting to be used, really putting pressure on Novorossiysk, the home of the Black Sea Fleet. And also, you're wondering whether these can be used against submarines. I don't know. Goodness. Right, President Zelensky said that in the next 2 weeks, Ukraine will launch 3 new platforms to export Ukrainian-made weapons. Some systems like naval drones and anti-tank weapons will be sold to fund more production and help close the budget gap. I've already talked about this several times with the attacks on Tuapse and Novorossiysk, which is, there was this idea that I think that the naval drones weren't being as effective now as they once were, because Russia has put booms across their ports and have adapted in this way and adapted in that way. And then yesterday we saw not quite successful attack on Novorossiysk, but successfully got into the port, and I think that is a huge success in and of itself. And then a somewhat successful attack on Tuapse, where a jetty was hit by one of these drones, and others were not so successful and were hit. But they can get there, they can do damage. So it's interesting that these sort of Magura style drones are one of the categories of equipment that Ukraine, they've changed their rules so they can sell equipment now abroad. Obviously they were stopping that from happening because they needed everything. They didn't want people selling stuff that would be necessary on the front lines. But there are certain things that maybe they've got too much of now that they don't need as much of, such as naval, USVs, unmanned surface vehicles. I don't know, but yesterday's happenings, you could argue that they could do with all of those USVs now. Now, a Ukrainian firm, Real Gold, makes 10,000 FPV drone engines a month, but it pays full VAT on doing so. So a value-added tax that they have to pay, and yet Chinese imports don't. It says it could scale to 100,000 without extra investment if the law wasn't rigged against it. So remove VAT on this, and we can build you 100,000 instead of 10,000, and you would start seeing a really big increase in domestically produced drones, etc., etc. So there's an interesting argument there. Now, talk about Ukrainian drone innovation. This is absolutely staggering. So this is a Ukrainian anti-aircraft drone. This is an interceptor drone, and it set a new speed record in Ukraine and Europe, accelerating to an FPV drone, a mere FPV drone, to 423 kilometers per hour. I presume that's going to be, let's have a look on the interwebs, 423 kilometers per hour in mph. That is 262 miles an hour, 263 miles an hour. So according to the developer company Defender, that's 110 meters per second. So here's the bad boy flying around, and this is it going at 300. You can see the counter up there at the top is now 330 kilometers an hour, and it's going to be moving to 423. And this is going, I mean, it doesn't look like it's going massively fast, and that's because it's fairly high up. If this was really low to the ground, you would see it absolutely race past the ground. So anyway, 423 kilometers an hour is exceptional there. Now here we have Kirilo Shevchenko. Again, we're on a section of just Ukrainian development here. A new Ukrainian robot for frontline logistics can both drive and swim. It carries up to 1.5 tons, that's 3,300 pounds, and travels about 12 miles to 20 kilometers per charge. With tracks, suspension, and jet ski thrusters, it crosses rivers and climbs steep banks. Beyond cargo, it can evacuate wounded in a sealed capsule. At $25,000 to $30,000 per unit, that's, by the way, fairly cheap, very cheap, really. It's a cost-effective way to restore mobility across rivers and destroyed bridges, filling a key gap in wartime supply chains. Again, it's that innovation that's taking place. And now, talking about these mobility vehicles that Ukraine is building themselves, here's another one that you can see being built in a workshop somewhere in Ukraine. Production of Ukrainian Gyurza 01 armoured vehicles by Ukramo Tech. 500 units were built in 2024. There are now plans for 1,500 units, I presume, to be built per year, so trebling the production output. Now, Ukraine is creating, in fact, are we getting on to troop stuff? I think that comes later. So we're going to have that later. We're going to talk about Ukraine's AI drones having 18 months to outpace Russia in an existential ruthless swarm race that could decide the war. Here's the real story behind Ukraine's desperate sprint toward autonomous warfare and why the 2027 deadline actually matters, says Euromaidan Press. Start with Ukraine's core problem. Quote, "We don't have as many human resources as Russia," says Deputy Digital Minister Alex Bornyakov. "They fight, they die, and they send more people. They don't care. Ukraine needs technology to compensate for that demographic reality. And right now, Ukraine's AI drones can't reliably hit moving vehicles." Drone commander Hyori Volkov watched his AI-enabled drones struggle in Kharkiv forests, where trees confuse the targeting and puddles get mistaken for tanks. Ukraine deployed AI drones at scale in March 2024. By June, soldiers had lost interest. Why? Cheap companies flooded the market with systems that didn't work, poisoning the well. The technology is still raw. What makes 2027 different? Well, former Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny warns that that's when human pilots get cut out entirely. While one human struggles to control 5 drones, AI could coordinate hundreds. That's not just an upgrade, it's a completely different kind of warfare. Russia's already testing the future. Their kamikaze drones now fly in groups of 6, each loaded with computing power and 4G modems, apparently. They're not just building better individual weapons, they're learning swarm coordination, while Ukraine's drones still hunt alone. Ukraine's approach has advantages, though. Over 100 companies compete for military contracts, and that's creating rapid innovation cycles. Volunteer groups like Dignitas treat development like agile software teams, constantly talking to frontline soldiers. Russia can't match that speed. But speed only matters if the technology actually works. Installing basic AI targeting costs about $150 per drone, cheap enough to scale. The problem, as Brave One's Max Makarchuk admits, hit rates keep declining as electronic warfare evolves faster than AI adaptation. The 2027 deadline isn't arbitrary. That's when Zelensky predicts autonomous weapons make warfare totally ruthless. Whichever side gets there first gains what military analysts call decisive advantage. Ukraine has 18 months to prove technology can beat demographics. Ukraine's entire war strategy hinges on this race. They've survived 3 years by being smarter, not stronger. If they lose the AI warfare competition, they lose their main advantage over Russia's superior numbers. The stakes couldn't be higher. Interesting. Well set out there. Now, Ukraine is to send, and they've had, this has been, I think, ratified and whatnot. Zelensky's registered a new bill on sending units of the Ukrainian Navy to Turkey and the UK until martial law is lifted. So they are going to, paragraph 1 or whatever of the bill, to send the following units of the naval forces of the armed forces of Ukraine to other states for a period until the termination or cancellation of martial law in Ukraine, introduced by the decree of the President of Ukraine dated February the 24th, 2022, number 64, 2022, on the introduction of martial law in Ukraine, approved by the law of Ukraine dated February the 24th, 2022, number 2102, blah, blah. 1. To the Republic of Turkey, the corvette Hetman Ivan Mazepa, so that's one of the corvettes that they've just had built by Turkey, with its full-time crew of up to 106 servicemen. 2, to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So they're going to send one corvette to Turkey, and they're going to send mine-clearing ship Cherkasy and Chernihiv and Mariupol and Melitopol and Henichesk, each of those with 39 servicemen, the full-time crew on board there. So they are sending 5 Ukrainian mine-clearing ships to the UK with all their service people on board. Obviously, you know, that's going to keep them safe. There'll be training, and yeah, it's just interesting that's gone through. UK is going to be, I guess, fairly happy with that, having 5 foreign vessels set up in the UK for that amount of time. Now, Space Forces are to be created in Ukraine by December the 31st this year. Wow. So Ukraine, we heard something about this before, like talk about satellites and Ukraine wanting to get involved. Obviously, they're going to be thinking about their future. You know, I know it seems kind of almost counterintuitive that they'll be thinking beyond this war when they need to make sure that they complete this war to their satisfaction. But they are thinking about Space Forces, and it may be that actually during this war, Space Forces might come in handy. And they're going to be sorted out by December the 31st this year. Now, they've also created new assault troops branch as a separate military force. And that's been announced by Zelensky. The decision to legally establish assault troops as a distinct military branch came after Russian forces began copying Ukraine's assault unit system, Zelensky told reporters. We will now create separate assault troops. This decision has been made. Everything is being prepared now, and I think in about a week or 10 days, everything will be working. Modern assault troops with a drone component, with everything else. Of course, they work together today. Assault regiments and the airborne assault forces perform joint tasks. The president said preparations are underway to announce this decision officially, that assault troops will soon be legally established as a separate branch of the armed forces. So that is happening. The formalization represents a significant restructuring of Ukraine's military organization, elevating what began as battalion and regiment formations into a distinct military branch with specialized capabilities, including integrated drone operations. And then finally, Shashant Joshi here reporting from The Economist, quote, "It's hard to see a route to Ukrainian victory without a much wider but politically very difficult level of conscription. Recruits would need to be dragged from civilian industries. Politicians' sons, now often protected, would have to go." So The Economist obviously here advocating for a mass conscription, mobilization in Ukraine. Something that we've talked about an awful lot here at ATP Geopolitics, that there is this tension between needing boots on the ground and those boots most likely needing to come from a demographic that is absolutely hollowed out. 18 to 25 is destroyed. And they're the people that you need to have babies. It's got the lowest infancy rate and the highest mortality rate in the world, Ukraine, or thereabouts. And you've got a demographic black hole in that key area where you also want people to get training and education in order to have a future for your economy, right? So, how do you get around that? Well, foreign fighters, convicts, all the things that Russia has been doing so successfully, although I would argue they need to be done in a much more humane manner. But they are trying that out. They've got over 10,100, I think, convicts have been signed up to the Ukrainian armed forces. But still, the big challenge there, boots on the ground, and The Economist writing about that ongoing, ever-present challenge. Right, now moving on to Russia. Zelensky says over 132,000 foreign-made parts were found in Russian weapons launched this week. More than 1,500 drones, 1,280 guided bombs, 50 missiles packed with tech from Europe, the US, China, Japan, and others. It's a big problem. You need to close those loopholes. Now, Russia showed off its new Sama MLRS. So this is a multiple launch rocket system. This was shown off during Putin's visit to the Motovilka plants. Built on a KAMAZ 63501 truck, the system has 6 launch tubes and an estimated range of 90 kilometers, likely using the 9M528 rocket, according to Military Journal. So if that's a regular unguided rocket, then they are going much further than, say, the Smerch and the Grad, BM-29 Grad and the Eurogan and whatnot. But if they are using guided munitions, then that's pretty comparable to the 84 kilometers of the HIMARS. Now, they already have a HIMARS equivalent, the Tornado, I forget which designation, Tornado S, Tornado U, Tornado G, one of those three is their kind of HIMARS equivalent. That can actually fire further than the HIMARS, but this looks to be just a general MLRS that can fire 90 kilometers. So we might see that on the front line. Now, Russian Prime Minister Mishustin has stated that the, quote, Microelectronics 2025 forum, that Russia will, he said at that forum, that Russia will deepen cooperation with Belarus and China in microelectronics. He claimed sanctions pushed the sector forward, production doubled in 5 years, and that Russia remains open to international cooperation. So obviously trying to double down on working in a concerted manner with all their best mates, China and Belarus in particular, and in manufacturing of microchips and microelectronics. Obviously that's super important for their weapons, and I presume they're relying at the moment wholesale on China. Now, Reuters reports that Chinese specialists are regularly visiting Russia to jointly develop military drones, including at sanctioned facilities. Over the past year, they repeatedly travelled to the Izhevsk-based Kupol plant and supplied it with strike and reconnaissance drones via a Russian intermediary. There you go. Chinese visiting a sanctioned Russian arms maker and doing all sorts of dodgy shenanigans. Yeah, that needs to stop, doesn't it? Now, it's been reported that Russians have developed a new drone that operates without a single communication channel and attacks its target autonomously. So the Russians are trying this out. So this is the race that you're seeing, the AI race, autonomous targeting, swarming. Ukrainian military specialist in electronic warfare and communications, head of the Center for Radio Technologies, Serhiy Beskresnov, call sign Flash, warned that the new Russian AI-powered drones can independently search for targets and are capable of object recognition. Quote, those who remember my series of reports, about the enemy's AI-powered drones, the V2U, a drone that searches for a target on its own and can recognize objects. Previously, in this type of drone, we found an LTE modem for certain purposes, but the last 3 captured drones I come across had no modem, the expert noted. Flash explained that now the drone has no communication channels at all. It navigates autonomously and attacks its target autonomously as well. Its control and navigation cannot be jammed by electronic warfare. So it's not receiving signals from anywhere. It's just working on, mapping that it has loaded in it. So it's got a camera feed. Like the only electronic warfare would be some kind of EMP, some electromagnetic pulse that just shuts out its electronics completely. Otherwise, electronic warfare is redundant. So it navigates autonomously and attacks its target autonomously as well. The control and navigation cannot be jammed by electronic warfare. Quote, I consider this technology a future threat. For example, a drone could fly along a road or railway line on its own, searching for targets to attack. There have already been cases where a drone attacked gatherings of people at a marketplace, the specialist warned about the new threat. Definitely a concern for the Ukrainians. That's what this looks like, the particular drone. And there you go. There's a picture of something. Okay, coming towards the end here. So Russia has... So if we go back a little bit. Russia has delivered new MiG-29 jets to Iran as a short-term boost. Su-35 deliveries are ongoing. Russia has proposed supplying and jointly producing its Su-57 jets in India. Russia will finish delivering all 5 S-400 missile systems to India by 2026, according to TASS. Now, India have got all this equipment from Russia on order, and Russia are unable to get it to them. This might sound like, yeah, we're going to do some forward-looking business plan with you, come up with an agreement, rather like South Korea and Poland, where you can produce some of these Su-57s locally. So Su-57 is like a, fifth and a half generation fighter or fifth generation fighter or something. Fifth generation, but a bit crap at that or something like that. Anyway, people not so endearing when speaking about the Su-57. So it could, sounds good, this, doesn't it? Oh, that's great. Russia and India co-producing the Su-57. So you're just making it under license, blah, blah, blah. And that's what a lot of countries are doing at the moment. That's a really viable way of building stuff. And it's good for Indian employment and taxes and blah, blah, blah. Realistically, this is Russia saying, we can't build this for you. We're screwed. Do you want to build it under license in India? And actually you've got a chance of getting these built on time. We will finishing delivering our 5 S-400 missile systems by 2026. At least that's what we're saying. But, can you cut us some slack? It's going to be interesting if they can get those S-400s to India. I would doubt the Su-57 jets. I don't know. That sounds a viable project, but even I wonder whether they can even get India building those. Anytime soon. Anyway, I just think that is an indication that Russia's in a lot of trouble with regard to its military-industrial complex. Now, Russia has moved apparently toward a year-round military conscription. I think they do 2 rounds of conscription a year. That's conscription, not mobilization. Mobilization is where you're mobilizing people. You're kind of forcing them to join up. Your number's up, matey. You have now got a contract with the armed forces. See you somewhere south of Pokrovsk. Conscription is, you're a young lad, come and join the military service. You will basically get you putting out fires in a forest over in the east for a year and, teach you how to tie your boots and crawl under some barbed wire doing a leopard crawl. Actually, now you're more likely to be thrown into Kursk. You're not allowed to be sent abroad, but actually that's a grey area since apparently Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk and Luhansk are now technically constitutionally part of Russia, so you could see a case for sending those conscripts into the front lines there. But I think they can be using the front lines in Kursk because they have it's permitted to use them to defend a country. But anyway, moving to toward a year-round conscription is again another sign that they're in trouble. While conscripts are officially barred from being deployed abroad, says a Kyiv Independent, reports indicate that many are pressured into signing contracts with Russia's defense ministry and sent to fight in Ukraine. So they join as conscripts and then they get press ganged into signing a contract, and then once they've done that, they're just whipped off to the front line because they have such need. I think that is another sign of the trouble that Russia are in. So all things told, I am quite upbeat about Ukraine's domestic production of weaponry at the moment. I'm worried about who's going to win the AI fight and who will then therefore get to have some kind of drone asymmetry, which I think will be really, really significant. Hopefully, Ukraine will be able to get there. Remember, they have the help of other nations as well, but it's really good to see their own innovation take off. That's excellent. I am upbeat about the Flamingo and other drones in their family. And we hear these rumors like the Toloka underwater drone there that looks like an oversized torpedo. There could be autonomous drones working underwater. I was talking about this at the beginning of the war, saying that's really what Ukraine needs to do: get these drones that would go underwater. And this is when Black Sea Fleet was in Sevastopol, but now Novorossiysk, goes underwater, hangs around outside the port, and then goes into standby mode and waits for something to come out of the port, and then bish bash bosh. I wonder whether they have developed something like that, and whether we will see anything be used anytime soon. But yeah, hopefully Ukraine are in a slightly better place than they were. I think throughout the war, I've said that each successive month is a month where Ukraine is getting better equipment than they had before. If it's coming from abroad or being made themselves, they are upgrading and they're increasing the amount of stuff they have. Whereas I think Russia is downgrading on a repeated basis. So all of the very many air defense systems and radars that have been destroyed in Crimea and elsewhere over the last month or two, they're not getting those back. They're not replacing them. I think Ukraine have a better chance of replacing their equipment. You talk about the Hensoldt for the MRLL, whatever it is, radars that they're getting from Germany. I think Ukraine are consistently going like this, and Russia are consistently going like that. And then while that is happening, while one side is upgrading in terms of equipment, you've got the personnel. So both of those are being attrited. The question is who's getting attrited at a greater ratio, and when is the tipping point where they kind of fall apart? Is Russia reaching that tipping point? Is Ukraine near that tipping point? I've said this is a game of attrition or chicken. And at the same time, you've got that in materiel, you've got this in personnel, and then you've got the economies. Now, the Ukrainian economy is being propped up by the West. The Russian economy isn't so much. And so the Russian economy is in trouble, and it is tanking, and all the canaries in the coal mines are dying. So while you've got kind of that and that, you have that going on for the Russian economy. And how will that affect this game of attritional chicken on this tipping point that's going to get reached, where hopefully the Russians will say, yeah, we're done for now. It's not looking good. Yeah, so I'm kind of up and down all the time on where things are at. Things are looking bad on the front line in certain areas. South of Pokrovsk at the moment, it's not looking good for the Ukrainians there. Pokrovsk is looking okay, but it's horrible. And then Sumy is looking better for the Ukrainians. But it's a real mixed bag of nuts, the front line. And so you look at all of this data and information here, and where does it leave you? It's skewed to all the things that the Ukraine are receiving and buying and developing. But I'm more hopeful for Ukraine in terms of defense tech and defense equipment. There's a lot to be said about personnel and boots on the ground. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.